and welcome to an Everyday Canines video. This is the Running Contact series and I want to talk to you about A-frames and the criteria we've talked about on the dog walk. I want to now transfer it to the A-frame and explain why there are a little couple of things you need to think about differently when we're talking about the A-frame. The first thing we need to be aware of an A-frame is it is a different form of running contact. The dog walk is effectively you're just running, it's like running over a bridge. But an A-frame, you are asking your dog to climb upwards. There is no way that the dog is effectively going to be running up this like it would the dog walk, because they've got to use enough momentum to get them to the apex before they come down. Depending on the size of the dog, that can be harder than if they're perhaps a really big dog. Sometimes they can do it quicker. Certainly smaller dogs, they need a lot of momentum to carry them over. And you can see if a dog hasn't got that momentum, they really struggle to reach their apex. So let's start with feet. Do I want front feet or rear feet hitting this contact area? Okay, when I'm looking at my A-frame contact, my ideal is front feet here or here, but this is sort of like a golden zone to here, and the back feet following in fairly close. Again, I would like to see a split stride. However, because the dog is not running quite the same way over a dog walk, you might not get that. So as long as my dog is hitting with those feet soundly there, it's okay if they then leap off. In fact, I would expect them to leap off, because if I ask my dog to come all the way down to here and run, it's impossible for them. I mean, they can do it, but it's back-breaking, because look at the angle you're asking them to come through. To get them to run like that, it's just not right for the physics, and it's actually quite bad for the dog's body. So what I want is I want my dog to hit this contact and then do a leap off onto the ground. So this is where it's a bit of a grey area compared to the dog walk. Obviously the dog walk, I'm never wanting them to leap, but with the A-frame we are going to ask for that little bit of that leap, preferably with a split feet at this point, but they are going to have to jump that last bit, because that's the only way for them to do this in a nice format. If we start to ask our dog to get too low, then they really have to start flicking their backs up to make this angle, and that is not good for their backs. We don't want to see that. So I am still looking for front feet and hind feet, but I am not so worried if the hind feet are not split and if they're doing this bunching to go down. So shall we have a look, Spare, see what you do with your feet? Frame. Good girl. So that's what we need to think about with feet and how their feet are coming onto this. Let's talk about top line. Now your top line is not going to be the same with the A-frame as with the dog walk, because there's going to come a point, it's going to be, yes, we want it to be parallel over here, but as we come down here, obviously the top line is going to go like this, because our dog is going to need to take off. So we're going to have to think to ourselves, the top line will be different. We can't look at it as we look at the dog walk. The other thing with the top line is to consider the apex. What I see sometimes with the apex, and it's very common in new dogs and dogs that are going too fast, is they leap really high over the apex. We don't want that. We want them to go over the apex as a little pop. Firstly, it's better for them physically, because if a dog leaps and it lands here, again, we're at an angle. And what happens is the dog flicks its back up, it can then get a sore back injuries. It's also putting a lot of force on the shoulders when it lands, because you think it's gone like this, it's huge momentum, and you're not even coming down on a flat soft surface, you're coming down on an angle, and they've now got to correct themselves. We don't want that. So that's first off. Secondly, it's a waste of energy. Taking things that high, in the air, it's a waste of energy. It might look amazing, but it is a waste of energy compared to the dog that just pops over, saves the energy, gets that beautiful run down. So top line, we want, oh hello madam, like that, don't we? We want a little pop over like that. We want this top line, as Swift is demonstrating, we want it to be a beautiful top line. Good girl, do you want to come down now? And you can see actually, as she's standing here, both girls, can you see the difference in their body angles when they're standing here? Obviously they're having to hold themselves, but can you see they're having to bow down on their back legs to keep themselves in position, and that's because of the angle. So that is something we need to bear out. Okay, can you get off then? Next we need to think about stride. Generally speaking, most dogs pick up the same stride pattern on an A-frame. it seems to be all dogs, there's a good comfort zone that all dogs get into when they're doing the A-frame that works really well. And it's typically 3 strides. It's 1 stride over the apex, hitting the front feet, a second stride here, and then a 3rd stride in the contact. If you're pushing your dog too hard to get 2 strides over, of course, depending on the size of the dog, it means the dog's going to be really pushing over here, and some dogs can do it. If they're big, powerful dogs, they can do that. But for smaller dogs, that is quite a reach, and then they've got to try and get this paw here. So while I have seen dogs do this in 2, some really big powerhouse of dogs do this in 2, I would say most dogs do the A-frame best in 3 strides. When I say 3 strides, I mean it's 3 strides down, usually 2 up. So it's 1, hello gorgeous, 1 when they hit their front paws here. Obviously they have to hit the contact on the way up as well on the way down. 2, somewhere about here, and then they go over the apex. And then that's when you get the 1, 2, 3 down. Dogs tend to develop a very uniform stride pattern on their A-frame. You tend to say that's what my dog does, and they will do it every time. I would argue that the A-frame is actually one of the easier contacts to sort as a running contact, because once that dog has that pattern in its head, it just repeats it over and over. And because the dog always has to hit this area in the same way to get the momentum to go up, as long as they're hitting it correctly here, generally they'll hit it correctly going down, though of course, as in all things, you can get some dogs that will leap off the A-frame. That tends to be more of a problem in bigger dogs. They don't put that last stride in, because for bigger dogs it can be a case that they get here and actually it starts to get uncomfortable to put in another stride. Because if you think of their backs, a little dog, they can get here without being too much of a problem to then effectively do a right angle to jump off, not causing too much discomfort. On bigger dogs, dogs that are perhaps slightly less flexible, it actually is better for them here. They prefer to be here before they try and jump off, because it's easier for them, it's nicer for their back. So, you know, that can be just a little bit there. But if we can get that stride pattern trained, if we can get them to always hit in a certain point here and a certain point here and a certain point here, then you're going to get consistency, they're going to understand their job, and you're going to be okay. In terms of speed and drive, yes, we want our dogs to be driven to power over the A-frame, absolutely. They need to be driving to get up this up plank in the first place. So we need them to be coming at this as fast as they can, ready to power themselves up. They're going to have to rely on their hind muscles to really push them. We don't want them dragging themselves up with their front legs. But when we reach the apex, we want them to control that speed. This is where we want that element of self-control. We want the dog to, we don't want them just flying over this. We want them to do a little, I call it a little pop, a little hop over. So I like to look at my A-frame, and it happens that my A-frame's got these struts in exactly the places I want to see my dog doing this little pop over. So I want to see my dog coming from here to here in this little hop, because this is a nice little arch they can do over there. So that's how I look at it. If your A-frame doesn't have struts, you can obviously work it out. You can actually put a little bit of tape on the sides if you want to have a guide to help you work out where your dog is doing it. If my dog starts to leap over, say from here, then we're going to expect them to land in a similar position, and it's too much. There's too much strain on the back, there's too much pressure and flicking going on. And sometimes the dog can actually lose their balance in the process and even do some quite ghastly things. Sparrow's done some quite ghastly things where she's ended up looking like she's fallen on her head, and it's horrible. So we want a nice little stride over here. And then the dog can power out and finish the contact. So with speed and drive, we are also thinking about control. It's not just how fast my dog can do this, it's also how cleanly, neatly and safely they can do this. So we can also use striders on the A-frame, and to be honest with you, I think striders perhaps work better on the A-frame than they do on the dog walk, and certainly for the apex behaviour it's quite handy to have striders to help teach the dog the apex behaviour, and then perhaps adding in that extra stride down here. So I have striders for my A-frame, and I use them far more than I do on my dog walk. But that's the same criteria as the dog walk, but on the A-frame, and why we must look at it slightly differently, because we're understanding it's a different piece of equipment, different angles, different needs. I hope you've enjoyed this Everyday Canines video, and if you have, you might have subscribed to the YouTube channel. You can also check us out on Facebook and Instagram, and I hope to see you all again very, very soon.